No.
I forgot it.
So unprofessional. Sorry, I'm wearing shorts, so we'll call it fair trade.
Okay. Get a full-length mirror over here.
Gotta make sure I look good for the camera.
Are we ready? Okay. So we've talked so far about families as systems from a functional and structural point of view, right? So we've talked about the processes by which families pursue their goals and monitor whether or not they're on task for achieving those goals. And we've talked about the different ways that families organize themselves around roles and power and control and affection patterns, right? So that's the elements of structure and function. But then, as we remember when we started, we talked about the third element of family life, and that was the culture of the family. And so what I'm going to talk about today is the culture of families and some elements of those. When we think about the family culture, one of the first things we can think about is the identity that families have and the identities that family members develop within their families. And so we can think of the family as having an identity itself, and we can also think of it as each of their members, to some degree, their individual identities are created and contained within the interaction patterns that they have with other family members. And so that's part of this culture. It's a set of meanings about who are we and who am I in this context. So identities are internalized sets of expectations for behavior in particular social contexts. At the individual level, when we think about someone's identity, their identity is how should I act? What's the expectation for how I should act in a particular situation? If it's a family identity, it has to do with how should I act as part of a family. And those expectations for how I should act are things that I internalize based upon how other people around me react to me. So I learn what people expect of me by their reactions to my behaviors. And so the behaviors of family members might be different than the behaviors of non-family members to the same behavior. And so my identity might be different in two different contexts, right? And so when we talk about identities, they're based on what we call reflected appraisals of others. Reflected appraisals are contained in other people's reactions to us. So when I say something, or I do something, or I wear a particular kind of clothing, or I comb my hair a particular way, or don't comb my hair, or whatever, people react. And their reactions tell me something about what is the meaning of that behavior. Is it appropriate or non-appropriate? And so I learn how to represent myself, both in terms of my appearance as well as in the kinds of behaviors that I have towards other people. Whether I'm nice or mean to them, or whether I'm competitive with them, it doesn't matter. There's a wide array of possible things that I could learn from my behaviors as to which ones are appropriate and what kind of behaviors are inappropriate given the situation. So we call that reflected appraisals of others. Whenever someone who's close to us, and particularly if it's a parent or what we call a significant other, someone whose opinion we greatly value, usually because we're very interdependent with them, we need them in our life, then we want to fulfill their expectations for us. And so we change our behaviors so that we get the right kind of reactions from them. And so those reactions are called reflected appraisals. Every time someone acts in a particular way in reaction to us, they're basically, to some extent, telling us what kind of person we are. To the extent that they're telling us what kind of person we are, or whether our behavior is appropriate, that element of their reaction is what we call a reflected appraisal. And this contains in what Cooley called the looking glass self. This is how we learn who we are. We're not born with being anybody. The only person that we are is the person that we realize in our social interactions with others that gets a reaction. And we want to have reactions that are predictable. Because we can't go through our life just constantly randomly acting in situations. We generally want to figure out, well, what is the right way to act so that I know and can anticipate how other people are going to react, and then that allows me to plan my life, to plan future actions, right? And so maintaining an identity requires conformity to expectations. So the identity that we start to build early in our life gets sustained through getting consistent responses from the people in our family of orientation, the family we grew up in. And then as we move out of that family, we then seek others who will react to us in ways which usually are fairly consistent with that family of origin reactions, because that's where our identity is at that point. We've internalized how family will react to us. We then act in our outside family life, and we expect others to respond in similar ways. If they don't, then we have a bit of a dilemma, and we're not really comfortable. We go interact with somebody else who will react to us in ways that are consistent with the identity that we've built up by internalizing all those interactions and all those expectations that our family of origin had for us. And so it's a very driving force in our family behavior, in our day-to-day behaviors. We can tolerate some differences because we say, well, the situation is different. And so I have an identity that's a family identity, and then I have a work identity that might be different, have different elements to it. And so we can partition it to some degree. Changing an identity requires changing others' expectations through repetition of alternative behaviors and communication. So as I grow up in this family of origin, I develop an identity. People come to see me as a certain kind of person based upon my behaviors and the consistency that I find in that I exhibit in my behaviors. Then, as I get older in that same family, I change. Okay? And probably the biggest place where we see change is in adolescence. And so my parents still see me a particular way as a child, but now I'm out in other environments and I'm having a hard time fitting their expectations for me, that identity that I developed as a child, in with what these new people that I am thrust into a new environment with are expecting me. And at the same time, I'm seeing myself physically different. And so I'm wondering, well, maybe that's a reason. And I start to think, well, I need to change my identity. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to change the whole family system. It's going to have to change to accommodate me, right? And so I need to get them to agree that I'm something different. Another case where this happens is in major life course transitions in families. So when families have their first child. Okay, so who am I? Well, I was a wife or a husband before. Now I am a parent. Now I'm still a husband or a wife, but I'm also a parent. And so being a parent might have special meaning for me based upon what I grew up internalizing as the role of a woman or a man in family life. And so all of a sudden to the forefront come those new expectations for how I think I should behave based upon my previously established identity standards. In order for me to be that person, however, I am now living in a new family with a spouse, and my spouse is going to have to agree. Because I can't be that kind of parent unless my spouse agrees to be something that's complementary. Okay? So if I think that as a parent, I want to be this over-involved super mom, and I want to be the one that takes care of the child and breastfeeds till the child is 6 years old, or, you know, this is this new intensive parenting, right? Mm-hmm. It's very mother-centered. Well, am I going to have a possibility of being married to a husband who wants to be involved in primary child care? Probably not. He's going to have to give that up. Right? I'm taking over. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that's going to put a lot of pressure on that relationship. So people are constantly negotiating identities in families. They try to find some place, and you know, you're not going to marry someone unless beforehand you have some idea that they're going to fit with you, that their idea of being a husband is your idea of is consistent with your idea of being a wife. They're going to have to play off of your expectations for being a wife in terms of how they perceive themselves to be a husband. They're going to have to fit in. If they don't, you generally don't marry them, hopefully, right? Ideally, you'll have had enough time with them before you get married to discuss the idea of what it is to be a husband and a wife, and to think about what your patterns will be, and to maybe play them out a little, and see if you are compatible in that regard, or to change your identities in ways that make you compatible so that then you can go forward and face the new events that you're going to face as a married couple and as a family. And so that's usually what happens, but sometimes these things can come out of focus. Sometimes two people can really fit together as husband and wife, but when they have a child, all of a sudden everything falls apart because a different identity comes to the forefront and becomes more salient than the spousal identity. Now the parent identity might not be something that the couple has talked about ahead of time. So this is an example of how identities, as a part of the cultural system of families, really play a role in the dynamics of those families and their abilities to maintain a satisfying relationship amongst family members, and to a large extent their ability to adapt to circumstances that they're going to face going forward as a family. There are two levels of individual identity that we can talk about and that require some level of integration. So, as I said, you're a family member and your identity develops in the context of that family culture, but you're also something else. You also have certain other characteristics that transcend the family. And so we call those your master identities or your master status identities. And so you have a certain gender, race, or ethnicity, and social class origins, which themselves place a broader sense of expectations for your behaviors. Now, usually your family reacts to you in ways that are consistent with these broader master status identities. And so when your parents react to you, if you're a girl versus a boy, they have different reactions to your behaviors that create expectations that then push you in a certain direction versus another. So those parental reactions are shaped by your master status. Okay. Then there's specific organizational identities, and these are based on roles negotiated in social relationships. And so this is the discussion that I just had about how when we get married, we have to negotiate what it means to be a husband and wife. Because there's not going to be exact agreement. And so we're going to have to figure that out. How do I fit my identity with yours in ways that make us compatible and make it that we can live with each other and be happy and satisfied? So if I need to change something, I need to change you. And if you want to change, you need to change me. We need to do this together, right? And they vary across organizational contexts, but must have some consistency. So the kind of person that I am as a husband and as a father, both within the context of my family, is going to have to play out in my identity as a professor, as a member of my community, or a member of some group that I belong to. To some degree, I can't be a very different kind of person in every setting.
Is that kind of why, like, they say that interracial couples don't normally work out as well?
Yeah, actually, there's a general understanding that interracial couples don't work out, but in actuality, they work out quite well. Okay. But this would be a reason why you would expect them to be more challenged. Okay. And maybe the reason they work out is because they are people who into those kinds of arrangements are capable of making the changes they need to make and do something to isolate themselves from overly stereotyped environments. And so because that race is a master identity, those couples do face a lot of challenges that other couples don't face, right? So a biracial family, say African American and Caucasian or Anglo, with a child. And until that child goes to school, they're pretty capable of managing the environments in which they operate. They can choose networks of people and organizations that don't see them based upon their race, but see them based upon their other personal characteristics. Okay? They might, if they have families that object, they might avoid those families, those extended family members, to try to create an environment in which they can be who they want to be and as a couple. Problem is, when their child goes to school, guess what? They face an organizational context that cares about race and identity. And so research, probably 10 years ago, I was at a conference and this woman was doing a presentation on biracial couples. And one of the things she talked about was how when their kids went to school, they faced a racial identity crisis for themselves and for their child, because they had to fill out on the form their race. And there was no category for anything but straight categories. And they objected to having to do that, because every time they do that, they then make a choice. And they were vehement. They shouldn't have to make a choice, because they didn't see themselves as black and they didn't see themselves as white. And so they wanted to push the organizational structure around them, in this case the educational system, to alter itself to accommodate them, and the argument was they have every right to be accommodated, that this actually disrupted their individual identities as they worked them out and negotiated with each other, as well as caused problems for what we're going to talk about next, their family identity. They had gone to great lengths to create a notion of who they were as being neither black nor white, and not even being some black and some white, but being a meld. And that's how they saw their relationship. And anytime they came into contact with organizations that couldn't understand that, it was problematic for them. Now, one of the articles I'm going to have you read from Monday actually is really nice in this regard. It's looking at adoptive families and the ways in which they tell stories in their day-to-day family life to build their family identities in ways that make it possible for other people to realize what they're about. Because most other families are not adopting families. And so how do they fit in? And they do this by seeking reflected appraisals from others, not as individuals, but as families. And they do that by telling stories about their family. And they tell the stories to other people. And when they tell the stories, then people understand who they are. Okay. There are two sources of development of individual identity, and one is socialization. We learn it from our parents. We get basically responded to and sometimes punished for going the wrong directions or rewarded for going in other directions. And that creates internalized expectations for what we should be focused on. We get encouraged to do certain things. Growing up, we read in storybooks that we're read to by our parents. We see, oh, that's a girl, I'm a girl, that's how I behave. I'm a boy, that's a boy, this is how boys behave. So we learn those lessons and we create those expectations for ourselves by observing others. And then later on, once we were able to develop a sense of who we are, because we do this without thinking, without reflecting, oh, I'm a boy, therefore I should act this way. We don't actually do that, right? We just, because we're a boy and we see another boy who's presented to us as someone who is appropriate, we then internalize that for ourselves. We don't get the sense that I'm a boy. That gradually evolves throughout childhood, right? So we start to see, well, there's boy's side and there's the girl's side. Oh, I'm a boy. That's my part, right? Mm-hmm. We become self-reflective, and when we become self-reflective, that's when we can start negotiating what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl. And that's usually in early adolescence that begins. Now, where are we going to do that negotiation? Well, since our identity is mostly based in that early family life, one of the most important places to negotiate that is with our other family members. And so research on coming out experiences of gay and lesbian youth are pretty significant, because this is the most challenging place to change that identity. How do I negotiate with my parents that I'm not heterosexual? They are. So that might be a particular problem given other aspects of our family culture. It might be very difficult for them to accept that ever, which makes it really difficult for those children because those family members are where most, sexual orientation is only one part of who you are. There's a whole other part there that's really clearly linked to that family of origin. And so often the coming out experience tends to work more indirectly, tends to be more maybe focused on siblings who might be more understanding, or aunts or uncles who might be more understanding, and then gradually create that revelation for parents in those circumstances. But it is a negotiation process. It's getting other people to think about you differently and to not expect you to act in ways that are inconsistent with the new identity that you've developed, be it a family of origin member or be it a spouse. Okay, so that's individual identity. Individual identity is pretty easy to understand, I think, right? You kind of know who you are. I know who I am to some degree. I mean, there's an ambiguity in there. Some people have less ambiguity than others. And there's a whole field of adolescent development and identity theory that talks about different kinds of identities, foreclosed and ambiguous, etc. And so people vary in those regards. What is family identity, though? What do we mean when we say family identity? Who are we as a family?
Maybe like how we are together, like what we are together.
Okay.
Like
What does that mean, like how we are together?
Well, like some families, like based on like what they do together could determine their family identity, like who they are in their community, what they do on their free time, and kind of on that idea, like if they're very into their church, or if they're very an outdoorsy family, or if they're very like educationally driven.
So it's shaped by shared kinds of activities?
Yeah,
to some degree, yeah. So it's a shared sense. Family identity itself is a shared sense of belongingness. We can identify that we have a family, and the people in it orient to it and say, we are a family. We might not be able to articulate what that is, but we identify that we are part of a system that involves specific other people in a specific set of relationships that are unique from other kinds of relationships we have with other people. So in a sense, it's a sense of belongingness accompanied by a shared understanding of our origins, our shared history, our current circumstances, and future expectations for continued interaction. So you can see in this definition, we are part of a group. The group began. The group began with mom and dad getting married. It actually began before that, grandma and grandpa getting married. But most recent history is mom and dad got married. What was that about? What was their marriage about? How did it begin? Do we all know stories? You know stories of your parents' beginnings?
Yeah.
Right? The whole family kind of knows, this is the story. This is how it started. Right? It started in an elevator. Right? It involved certain kinds of activities. My family began waiting for an elevator and evolved around going to art museum. Okay. So this was the beginning. And it had a period of time in it that there was maybe, so this is the shared history. There was a period of time before a child was born. And this was what life was like then as a couple. And then when the child was born, this was how it got transformed. And we kind of have a history, kind of have a storyline that says that we are an ongoing thing. We are an entity. It has origins. It has a history. It has current circumstances. And today, this is what our family is about. It's morphed into something different. Okay? And then it has future expectations for continued interaction. And so we as a family see ourselves going forward in this way. So we can actually reflect on what a family is. That's our family identity. It's consisted of all those things. It gets realized in various ways. It gets built and shaped through a variety of processes. And so that's what I want to talk about next. How are these identities created? One is we're inherited from our sociocultural background. So my family is a white middle class family, or maybe a white educated class family. Okay. My family growing up was a working class, white working class family, quite different. Had different implications about, I would say, oh, that's a white working class family versus that's a white educated family. Would you think differently about the nature of those family lives? Mm-hmm. Is there an image that we have in our society about what that means in terms of the nature of the interactions? Yes. Mm-hmm. And does that image then, is it a reflection of reality for those families who are identified that way by their race, ethnicity, and social class? To some degree, yes. To some degree, those families are the kinds of things that shape their lives. Their experiences together are shared with other families from the same race, ethnicity, or social class background. And they develop ways of managing their lives and dealing with their circumstances that are borrowed from other people in their, what Foucault would call the habitus, their cultural group. And so they reenact those patterns and they become real. And they become internalized as part of their family identity, internalized in the form of their interactions with each other and the meanings that they shape around those interactions. And so that's, to some degree, our family identity is shaped by our sociocultural factors. But it's also shaped more personally by shared experiences as a group, separate from other groups. So our family and what it is about at any given point in time, because these identities can shift and change, just like an individual identity can shift and change, right? So those identities get enacted, or maybe a better term is objectified, through a set of shared experiences. We do things together as a group in a particular way that makes us distinctive from other groups, other families. And they become our markers of who we are. And so we understand what our roles are as individuals within those events. We understand how we behave in those events. We understand how those events will unfold. And these things we call rituals. So we develop these things called rituals that become what we're about. Or shape or reflect what we're about. When I was growing up, my father would go away for the week. He'd come home on the weekend because we were a racetrack family, and so he would go wherever the races were. Sometimes he had to go to, drive 300 miles away, and he'd stay there during the week, and he'd come home. And whenever he came home, there was this great explosion that happened. He'd drive up that driveway, and there was a ritual of going out there and just jumping on him, and then he'd come in, and we'd always know exactly what he would do. He'd always go sit in that same chair, get a beer, sit in the same chair, get out his crossword puzzle, and do the crossword puzzle. And he would always have his khaki pants on, because he always wore khaki pants to work. That was his, wasn't an official uniform, but that was what his uniform was. He always wore the same clothes. And then, after dinner or something like that, we would always get a ride on his knee, right? He'd cross his legs and he'd put us on the end of his foot. And we do this riding thing, right? In some ways, that ritual around his coming home was important for our family identity. It was marked our family identity, right? We were participants in this family system that included a father who wasn't there 5 days a week, right? But when he came home, these rituals integrated him back in, like he was never gone. And in some ways, they really linked us to what he did when he was gone. Now, probably every parent jogs their child on their... We did it every single week. And in some ways, it was part of what he was and what we were connected to outside of our family that then shaped our interactions with each other. And so we had this ritual that kind of was important in shaping our understandings of who we were, that we were worthy, that we were together, and who was part of the family. And by playing up this return, it was, because he wasn't there all the time, it was fairly important for maintaining our notion of who we were as a family, right? Mm-hmm. Another way that we shape identities is through ongoing and changing narratives. We tell stories. We tell stories about what our family is, about those experiences that we've had. They could be stories about our genetic or sociocultural origins. So on the one hand, social cultural factors play a role in identifying who we are. But on another level, we just don't accept those. We can modify them. So we can tell the story of what it means to be black or what it means to be mixed race. And we can tell the story in a way that allows us to live together as a family more effectively in a more satisfying way. And so we create that notion of who we are in terms of our sociocultural origins and also to some degree our genetic origins. I am the product of a family that had an alcoholic parent in it. So that alcoholic parent, because we know, I could create a whole story about the genetic transmission of alcoholism and how that then shapes who I am now as a family member. That potential to be an alcoholic might be integrated into my family life and why my family does things the way they do. Family of origin experiences, what it was like growing up in the family that I grew up in. So I'm creating a new family. What was my family like growing up? What kinds of things did we do? What kinds of things did I have to go through as a child? The stories I tell about that are going to reflect on what it is my current family is about. My mother used to always talk about having to walk through the snow 5 miles to go to school. Probably every mother talks about that, I think. In some ways, she's telling me school is valuable. I value school. By telling that story, even if it's a lie, right? Because it's never really a lie. It's usually a elaboration. It's a modification of what happened, right? And it's taking experiences and putting them down into a fable or a moral by telling the story of your origins. What you're doing is you're reinforcing in your own family, these are what things we believe in. These are the things that are going to constrain our behaviors, right? And so families create their identities through telling stories of the parent's origin. They construct stories of their marital relationship. When did it begin? How did it unfold? What was those early years like? Were there lots of difficulties? Were there break-offs and getting back together? Were there lots of fights, or was it idyllic? Again, the stories aren't always true, right? If you ask most people, well, what was the story of your marriage relationship? And you ask them that story before they get into trouble later on in their life with the potential for divorce or something of that effect. Well, they're probably going to tell a story that's positive. We're going to shape an image of our life that's positive, because it's going to create that motivation to continue going forward. It's going to create a lot of sort of positive interactions that happen within the group. But if things start to fall apart, we oftentimes reconstruct that story, don't we? Well, it was never all that great. You know, I remember back when, and we bring up incidents that we've never talked about before. Because what we're doing is reshaping our image so that we can go forward as something new as a family. Okay? Now, if it's a divorce and there's children involved, how we do that can be very important. What kinds of stories we tell might have implications for how well our child adjusts to the situation after divorce. We wouldn't want to tell stories about our partner being an awful person or something to that effect. We generally will want to kind of maintain a positive relationship for the child. But some families don't do that. They bring forward a story that's a grittier story, and those children might have more difficulties. So family identity, what was our marriage? We tell stories that reshape what that identity is. So it's never the same. It can always change. Parent-child relationship experiences. Oh, you were a difficult child, right? Or you were the favorite. I get that all the time. I was the favorite. I don't think it's true, you know? But it's part of who we are as a family. I'm considered to be the favorite. I don't know what that means. I don't know how it's affected my life. I guess I never really sat down and thought very much about it, but I'm sure it's there somewhere. But it's part of our identity. And then relationships with extended family. And I should also put on sibling relationships as well, right? So I've talked already about my identity as a family. My family is several segments, groupings of siblings. And when I think of my family identity growing up, I know that my feeling of what my family identity was when I was growing up is different than what my brother would say was the family identity when he was growing up. It shifted. For some reason, something happened in there that changed the whole set of ideas about who we were as a family and what we valued, what was important, what were the important lessons of life. All of that went into that storytelling along the way. When I reflect back on it, I think, oh, that's how my family identity has shifted and changed. So later, I'm going to talk in a minute about rituals, but then later when we have the discussion on next time, we'll talk more specifically about these narratives or these stories that people tell about their families and how they can be very important in how families deal with their circumstances. Some key factors that shape family identities. One is shared understandings of individual members' feelings, behaviors, life goals, and motivations. So who we are as a family involves who are the members and what's important in their life. And so we get to know each other. And as we get to know each other, we understand what's important to them. And that feeds into our understandings of how we are supportive of each other, what are our possibilities in life. For example, knowing that my mother always wanted to have an education. Very important in shaping my family identity, the identity of the family that I grew up in. A real strong value to get an education. To do that, it was what she wanted me to do. Okay. Shared constructions of pre-existing conditions and events, for example, genetic heritage or life cycle events. So, as I said earlier, you know, what is our genetic lineage? How does that then shape how we interact with each other and what we're cautious about? We don't want to fall into the problem of alcoholism or some other kind of genetically proclivities that we might have. Also, life cycle events. Was there a divorce sometime in the past? How do we interpret that divorce? Third, unavoidable existential conflicts shape the identity of our family. in the sense of all families are going to struggle to some degree with autonomy versus connectedness, how much autonomy is appropriate, and stability versus change. So are we a changing family? Are we a stable family? To some degree, those identities shift unavoidably as the members change. And so when we go into adolescence, we're going to see more change, we're going to see more autonomy, less connectedness at those stages of our life. A fourth factor that shapes family identities are these what we call transactional patterns that enable or constrain behavior of family members. Some families develop patterns that really can be problematic for their members, and that becomes part of who they are as a family. And so we can talk about double binding. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Okay? I want you to go away and get the best education possible, but I couldn't stand it if you left me. Okay? So what does that do? I mean, if that's an idea that's present in the family culture, what would a student who wants to go to college do in that circumstance? They're stuck in a double bind, right? Or triangulating, putting responsibility on a third party. Oh, if you go to school, if you go away to school, your husband, your dad and I, we'll probably get divorced. Like you're the only person holding this thing together.
Horrible.
Yeah, I know. It's been done. It's been said. Oh. So that would be a triangulating kind of set of patterns that you would find in some families. Do they do a lot of triangulating? Now, triangulating is a conflict resolution or conflict management technique. It's not a good one, but it's one that we often see in families where they can't resolve differences. And so what they do is they triangulate. They escape the difference by offloading onto either another member, or sometimes they triangulate by focusing on work. So if they lose their job, they'll fall apart. Sometimes it's alcohol or drugs. And so the alcohol and drugs become a substitute for what is a problem in the dynamics of the interaction. Scapegoating, allocating individual responsibility for failures. So blaming someone for something. Family life was always terrible. Family life, we had a really problem in my family life when my brother was 16 years old. He was the reason. And so families, and they construct the stories of who they are, they might involve scapegoating a particular member as being responsible for negative things. The opposite of use of metaphors to highlight the importance of someone. You are the cog that holds everything together. You are the star. You are the twinkle in my eye. You are my pride and joy. Or you are the family's pride and joy. You are the successful one. Okay? And so that can be an issue for some families' members as well. So if you imagine, I'm drawing on these from an article that actually looked at how we might better advise high school students who are thinking of pursuing a college degree and what kind of degree they are interested in. And this particular article talks about how this can put unrealistic expectations on a teenager in high school in terms of what they wind up going for, even if they realistically know they can't do it, because they need to fulfill these responsibilities because there's pressure from the family. It's not like you have to do it, but it's more of a subtle pressure by using these metaphors to hide the idea that we expect you to be really great, right? The opposite is we expect you to fail or to cause disaster wherever you go, or if you go away from us, you'll destroy our family. And so these are issues that this article actually argues have to be dealt with by school counselors when they're talking to their students about choosing a college and choosing a degree or a career. These things come up. And then expressions of intimacy, the desire for maintaining closeness. And so this would be a more positive one. You could say to this child, well, we like being close to you, but we can maintain that closeness through email, or we can maintain that closeness through phone calls. So, you're free to go, as opposed to, we don't want you to ever leave us. Okay? The phone calls won't be sufficient. You're going to have to come home every weekend or something to that effect. So you have to choose a place that's close by. If I can go back to this one, the shared understandings of individuals and members' feelings, behaviors, life goals, and motivations. One of the examples they use there in the counseling element was what happens if a child wants to go and get a college education, wants to be an engineer or something to that effect, and has a father who was really talented in the area of science and technology, but lacked the education growing up in his family, and has been always telling that story about how he couldn't go to college, how he had to get a job and sacrifice for his family. Now, how does that child decide they're going to go to college and do something, especially if it's something that they know their parent was denied in his childhood? Makes it very difficult. Family histories, family identity, part of the family culture is this, are these stories. And they can be very constraining on kids in terms of their choices and decisions. Finally, the article on counseling talks about, what happened? What they call the ethics of due consideration. So families develop sort of ethical guidelines for their members' behaviors that define what's justifiable from the family's perspective. And so elements of this ethics of due consideration are legacy, expectations inherited from previous generations. You need to carry on. You need to carry forward with what we have sculpted and created for you. I always wonder about this with my daughter. She's the daughter of 2 professors. Does she feel the sense of a legacy of higher education because of being the daughter of 2 professors? Well, we've never encouraged that idea, I don't think, very much. Although we certainly have immersed her in the world of higher education when she was growing up. So she probably does feel a little bit of that pressure. And it can be good, or it could be pushing her in a direction that she will never be happy in. And so families have that legacy element to them that oftentimes can result in their members going forward in their lives in ways that might not be most suitable for them. On the other hand, it might also be the legacy is strong and there's enough background that that individual does wind up being successful in spite of the legacy effect. Trustworthiness, the extent to which family members can be counted on or in need of monitoring versus being in need of monitoring and supervision. And so within the context of every family, there's a sense that, hey, this is the kind of person you've already been in this family. You can't be trusted. Or this person can be trusted. And so they can be given more leeway. They don't have to be watched as closely. Merit, credit given to family members based on an acknowledgement of the contributions to the family goals. So the extent to which your family considers that you have merit, that you've made contributions, you've done things that have enhanced the family life and enhanced the achievement of family goals. The extent to which families have, or members have earned entitlement within families. So expectations for favor based on previous contributions. And so are you entitled to something in your family life? Do you feel entitled?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel entitled relative to your siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother.
Do you feel entitled differently than him?
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Where did that come from?
My college softball playing by my dad, my teaching, my having 2 jobs, and my brother being really indecisive with his major, never really having any athletic interests. And
okay, so you did things that seemed to fit the family culture maybe a little bit more. and got points for doing that. And so you feel a bit entitled relative to your, you know, just to save your face, you don't feel really exorbitantly entitled relative to him.
It's more like my parents
Yeah.
put me more entitled than they do my brother. Like they think I deserve more.
But you probably also believe that a little bit too.
Yeah, well, I mean, who doesn't?
See, I feel like I don't feel as entitled. Maybe because everyone's convinced me that I was the favorite, so I don't deserve to be entitled. I don't know. Autonomy, expectations for autonomous action and decision making by family members. So how much autonomy can you be given? And that really depends upon how much you've fulfilled expectations in the past. And so these are elements of the family culture that are going to be important for understanding how individuals make decisions in their lives outside of the family, in this case, choosing a school to go to. That family culture is there, and it's real. And these things are playing onto it that may be constraining what those choices are, or maybe pushing those choices in a direction that aren't ideal for the individual as an adult. And so that's a kind of important element, the idea of family culture here. A really good example of this, too, is this movie called Real Women Have Curves. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a great movie. It's about a Hispanic woman in Los Angeles, a high school girl, and she works in her parents' sweatshop, making dresses for wealthy clients. And she goes to school, and she succeeds, and she's very good. And she gets a full ride scholarship to Columbia University in New York, right? Worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Both just in tuition costs, never mind the potential for income earning afterwards. But she feels as though accepting it would be disloyal to her family. She feels as though accepting it would create a feeling of inferiority or amongst her father and mother. She feels accepting it would be to be disloyal to her obligations as part of this family, as a firm almost. And so she has to struggle with how she makes that decision. And it's sort of about how the school counselor tries to convince the parents to let her go. Part of that is part of her family culture. Education wasn't part of the family culture. Getting by and being successful getting by, which they were. It was a sweatshop kind of operation. It was a family sweatshop, basically. They sewed dresses for wealthy clients. But that's how they got by. And there were no other opportunities. And so they really were successful at something. But it wasn't the standard way of being successful in American society. Going through the educational system and getting a job and, becoming a lawyer or a doctor or something like that, right? They were under the table kind of operation. And so this avenue that was open to her really was threatening to the family culture. Their sense of who we are and that we're worthy, and you're part of this group and you make us part of that worthy unit. Now you're saying we're not worthy by doing this behavior. And so that's another good example of how family culture can really play a role in the outcomes for individuals.
Will you give her the ending and say she goes to the school?
Huh?
Will you give her the ending?
Yeah, she goes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. And actually, the person that wrote this article about integrating family culture ideas into school counseling probably would really like this movie, because it's about the counselor and the counselor going and talking to the family and trying to work with them to reorganize their family story, as opposed to being one of just survival by working in the sweatshop to actually creating something new that was in the legitimate stream of the society. All right, let's take a break, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about family ritual, and then we'll quit.
Okay.
Just a couple of minutes, is that good?
Yeah, I switched into the restroom.
good? Okay. All right, so that's sort of an overview of family culture and identity. I next want to talk about one aspect of family culture, and that helps shape identity, and that's the idea of family ritual. Rituals are patterns of behavior with symbolic significance, which may or may not have any kind of manifest function for the family. So when I say a manifest function, what are we doing? We do the same thing every week. What's its purpose? Are we doing it to achieve some goal? Not necessarily. We just do it. It's part of our patterns of life. And it has special symbolic significance. So I think the example of my father coming home every week and the ritual that we had of all piling on top of him, and then his coming and sitting down and playing out that whole scenario. Well, it was just part of it, everyday life. Him coming home, we greeted him. He participated in it because he saw that we got meaning out of it. And then we ate dinner, and then he sat down and he did his crossword, and we left him alone, and then he played with us at the end. That all was part of that special time that integrated him into our family as part of our family, but we didn't do it for that purpose. It was just something that evolved in our day-to-day interactions that took on significance. And actually, for us at the time, we didn't even realize what the significance was. It's only thinking back, oh, I can see that what that significance is now. 3 types of rituals that we distinguish between. One is cultural celebrations, and these are things such as Passover, Christmas, Easter, Eid. These are celebrations which are part of the group that we belong to outside the family. Okay? So they link, these kinds of celebrations link the family to external cultural institutions and meaning systems. So my family, every year, we celebrated Easter, or Christmas, we went to midnight mass. It was part of our family life. Everybody went, except my father, because he wasn't Catholic. We all went. My mother sang in the choir. We listened to her sing. That was all part of Christmas Eve. And then we came home and we opened one present. It's part of our tradition. Okay. Well, going to church as a group really defined us in our community. Everyone knew that we were connected to that church. Therefore, they assumed that we had certain sets of values, we had certain sets of standards in our lives, and they were connected to that religious institution. They wouldn't know that if we practice our religion at home. So that's a kind of celebration that really links us to external institutions. People in that church know who we are. They will, when they saw the children on the street, if the children were without the parents, they would expect that those children would act in particular ways, and they would feel righteous in letting the parents know if they were acting in ways that weren't appropriate. And so not only did they link us to these cultural institutions, but also these meaning systems. This is what it means to be a Christian. And so we had to fulfill those expectations even when we were outside the family, because we were linked to that community through our participation in these observations, in these celebrations. So it helps establish family identity both internally and externally. So we know what we are about in terms of our values. We heard them every Sunday. And we also, everybody in the community knows what we're about as a family. And it reinforces the family value systems. So to the extent that participating in these things, those were the things that we brought into our family as well. And so they were reinforced in our daily lives. A second kind of ritual is what we call family traditions. And these are things like birthdays, anniversaries. They mark changes in family and family members over time. So this is how we keep track of our history, basically. Okay? Remember your 50th? I just talked to my mom when I was visiting the other day. Yeah, that was during your 90th birthday party, or that was your 80th birthday party, your 70th birthday party, and we can actually mark changes in her life based upon what happened at those celebrations. We could actually talk amongst ourselves and say, yeah, you know, her memory's really lost a lot. And then since her 80th birthday to her 90th birthday, you could really tell by her interactions at those points in time. And so they're markers, and they kind of help us sort of assess what's going on in the members' behaviors as well as in the family as a whole. Oh yeah, that was an awful year when we had that party celebrating my parents' 50th anniversary, you know, as opposed to their 30th anniversary. So what was their marriage like at each of those points in time? You know, you can actually use these as yardsticks for measuring things. So they help provide a sense of continuity and coherence. Yeah, same birthday, same party, you know. I'm 3, it's day for my birthday. We're going to do all these things. It's going to be in a particular way. We're going to play pin the tail on the donkey. We're going to have a birthday cake. We're going to have ice cream. We're going to invite certain sets of friends over. And then when I turn 4, I'm going to do it again. And when I turn 5, and I'm, you know, everybody knows that it's going to happen. It's planned for. It's organized. It's detailed. You know, what happened to the games this year? Why didn't we have them? Or how come I didn't get to invite anybody? No, there are expectations that come with it. And so it creates a sense that you're all together, that you can coordinate something like this together, that it's your family's event. And so it gives that special meaning to being a family. So that's this sense of coherence. So we can mark our time, continuity. We have a past. We can mark it with anniversaries, and we can mark it with birthdays. And we have a sense of coherence in the sense that we do it in organized ways every year. So it's got that sense that we are a unit. We function together. Other things might fall by the wayside. We might not do them particularly well, but we always do this well, right? And so it at least establishes ourselves as being okay. I think a lot of couples today, young couples, before they get married, when they're dating or something, they celebrate their 1-year anniversary or 6-month anniversary of being together. In some ways, it kind of, like, you shouldn't have to do that almost, right? It should just, like, everything should be happy all the way through, but it's not always perfect. And so you have these celebrations to sort of reaffirm, yeah, we're good together. Yeah, we're good together. The next one, oh, wait, maybe we're not so good together. It didn't work out well this time. Well, maybe that's telling us something that we've been ignoring problems in the relationship going forward in the past. And now the ritual is going to tell us that it's not working so well. So when you have an anniversary, and every year you buy your partner roses, and then you buy them roses, and you buy them roses, and the next time you forget. Right? Tells you something. And so they're really good markers. They provide opportunities for changes in individual and family identities as well. So the ritual will change depending upon where you're at in your own identities. And so the kind of anniversaries you had when you were married for 5 years don't look the same as the anniversaries you have when you're married for 30 years. Right? Because you're different people. You have different priorities. You have different things that are important in your life. And so those change the nature of the ritual. And so you recognize that when you celebrate the ritual. You can also have the opportunity to say, well, I don't like where we're going. Let's shift this. Let's change this. And if the ritual changes because it's reflecting a changing in reality of one or both of the members, or more than both of the members, depending upon whether you're talking about the couple or the family. And then pattern interactions themselves also constitute rituals. You don't have to have these events related around some cultural event or some family event. They could be everyday kinds of patterns that families enact. Family meals is a really good one. Families always get together for the evening meal, or my family wasn't necessarily every evening, but it was every Sunday meal. We would all be there. Vacations. Going on your annual vacation. Some families did that on a regular basis. It's the second week of August. We're gone. We know that, right? And we know where we're going to go. We're going to go camping, or we know exactly where we're going to go. And then weekends, weekend events can be very important as well. So we ritualize our weekends many times. Now, most families today, the weekends aren't all that family oriented and not all that planned out. But, except for some families. And so families of divorced families with a child, oftentimes weekends are very special times. And what happens on those weekends and preserving that weekend visit or every other weekend visit can be really critical in maintaining the notion of the non-custodial parent still being in that child's life. And any failure to have that weekend is why many divorced parents who want to maintain that connection with their children, they'll do anything to make sure that the weekend happens. It's critical. It doesn't matter, anything else in their life will be put on the side because that weekend is what defines them as part of their child's family. And so those weekend patterns, those visitation patterns, can be very critical in sustaining family identity and outcomes for the child and for the parent. So these reinforce existing culture and structure for the most part. They tend to say, hey, this is who we are, this is who's part of the group, these are the people participating, and these are the kinds of behaviors that we enact towards each other. These are the kinds of rules that we comply with. And when we talk during these episodes, we create family identity. We create that culture, right? And so what happens around the dinner table is pretty important oftentimes. So it can help reinforce our culture and our structure and provide a sense of stability and cohesion. We know it. We know our family's there. Sunday dinner. I could mark my life by Sunday dinner. We always ate at 1 o'clock. We went to church, we came home. There were certain procedures that everybody went through, preparing food. Children, depending on who they were, boys or girls, did different things. Certain people set the table. There was places where people sat. Everybody sat in the exact same place every single Sunday. The food was pretty consistent. We pretty much knew what we were going to have, a roast usually of some sort, mashed potatoes and some dessert and some vegetable. Right? And if it was broccoli, we put the broccoli in the mashed potatoes and made forests, and it was all part of enacting the family dinner. And when we were sitting there, we talked about things. I can't remember what we talked about because I was a kid, but probably we talked too much as kids and we were told that we should be seen and not heard, but that was part of what our culture was. Children are to be seen and not heard. So, and there may have been arguments, and the arguments got hashed out, and peace was created at the family meal. And it actually started before the family meal. It usually started sometime, I can't remember whether it was on Saturday or whether it was on Sunday after church. I think it was on Sunday after church. We would go to the Butcher Boy, which was this butcher shop. And we always went there because my dad got the best cuts because he was a good friend of the guy. So we always got these special deals. And we went there as a group, the kids and my mom, and we bought the roast and we talked to the butcher and we created this connection. And they knew who we were. We were this family. We were this mother duck and her ducklings following along, right? And we trailed in and we trailed out with our goods, and then we went home and we cooked it and shared in it and ate in it. And then afterwards, the girls went in and did the dishes, and the boys and the dad went in and watched football. At halftime, we always went out and played football for a little bit and then came back in and watched the rest of the football game. That was Sunday. At some point, my sisters got older, and we got into conflict in the tradition. It had to change. We had to negotiate because they wanted to watch some movie on the TV. So there was always this fight, and we had to re-regulate what was important. Somehow, I don't know, somewhere along the line, they gained more power in the family. So they got to watch what they wanted. So the ritual changed, but generally it's reinforcing the idea that we are a family, we do things shared together, and there are certain roles that people occupy in the family, and those roles are played out in the rituals. And this is a particular pattern interaction ritual, the family meal. And these really show those roles. The significance of rituals then is they create family environment linkages. They link the family to external institutions like churches and communities, educational systems. Link family culture to broader cultural systems of meaning. So being a Christian family, being a family in which the parents are really participant in the school system, so an education-focused family, for example, or a family that partakes in every year the voting or every other year voting events because they're part of the local party machinations. We went to, when I was a kid, we used to go to bake sale, not bake sales, barbecues and these kinds of things that were sponsored by the political party that my mother was involved in. This was who we were. We were a political, education-focused, religious family. That's who we were. We weren't particularly a sports family, although we were a racetrack family, and probably earlier in my family life it was more around that, and so a lot of traditions were around the racetrack, but when I was growing up it was less of that. And then provide external sources of appraisal to establish identity. How do we verify what kind of family we are? And this is particularly problematic for the parents, the executors of the system. How do we verify that we are the kind of family that we value? Well, what we do is we expose ourselves to people who are the judges of that. People outside of our family, the people in the church, the people at the political events that we attend, that type of thing. And so those people see us and say, yeah, you're part of who we are. And if you're not, if you're acting in ways that are inconsistent, they will work to try to bring you in line. But we need other people to verify these identities. And that's, these rituals, participation in these rituals can often do that. We do it very early in life in the honeymoon. So we are a couple now. How do we verify that we're different? That we're no longer just living together, that we're no longer just dating, that we're now married. And somehow that's more significant and it has more elements to it, more meaning to it. Well, what do we do? We go on a honeymoon where there are lots of people who are also honeymooners, and it's a honeymoon resort where the staff and everybody else looks at us as honeymoons and treats us as new married couples. And then we take lots of pictures of ourselves doing things together in this beautiful idyllic scenery, and we post them on the internet so other people can comment and say, oh, I wish I was there, or, you know, you're such a happy couple, or, right? So we create this image through participating in the ritual, in this case the honeymoon ritual, which is a kind of family ritual, right? Another significance is family coherence, the idea of being a family. So not just that we have a linkage that helps establish that identity, but we actually have a sense that we are a unit. Not from reflected appraisals of others, but simply from our personal experience. And so by participating in the rituals, we reinforce our cultural beliefs and values. We say to each other, this is the things we believe in, and we actually do things that are in line with those beliefs and values. We reinforce family identity and coherence. We reinforce individual identities within the family. So we get to, by participating in this, we reassess who are we? What is our role? How am I created in the context of these other people? How do they see me? I play out that role within the context of the ritual, and I reinforce family cohesion and belongingness. It's us that are doing this. Other people, we don't usually invite. There was never a time, or very rarely was there a time, that there would be someone other than a family member at the Sunday dinner table. It was family. Okay? If we were having someone over for dinner, it would usually be at another time. Okay? And in some ways, you remember those things too, because they're deviations from the ritual. And then adaptive functions of ritual provide information about system and individual functioning. So when you partake in the ritual, you understand that someone's changed. or someone's not behaving in ways that are predictable within the context of a routine, it's always done this way. Why are you doing something different? Okay? Years ago, I made a decision to leave the annual 4th of July picnic of my family. I was going to go to the beach to go and see Three Dog Night in concert. You probably don't even know who Three Dog Night is, right? They did this song called "One Is the Loneliest Number." You
Oh,
ever heard
yeah,
this
yeah.
song?
Okay, I know that song.
Well, it's oldie. It's an old oldie. So, I'm leaving. Never before would I have left the ritual of the 4th of July picnic. It was an important event. It was a fun time. But I was different. I was 17. Or 16. I think it was 17. I was going to be 17. I was 16. It was different. I was different. I'm independent. This is kid stuff. I'm going to go to the beach. So I hitchhiked to the beach.
What?
Right? My mother let me go. She kind of said, well, this is the 4th of July. You're supposed to be here. But then she kind of saw this autonomy and kind of said, oh, okay, I need to. So there was some allowance there. But it was a clear indication that by doing that, I was saying, I'm separate. And I'm getting this new autonomy. It was a really bad decision, by the way.
Oh, no.
Got a ride with a guy that hit a house at about 90 miles an hour. So it was like this most, I don't think we ever had another 4th of July picnic afterwards. No, we did.
Oh, I was like, oh my gosh.
But I mean, it was, that aside, my choosing not to participate was significant in meaning. Because the event, the ritual, was significant. It was a family event. It was a sense of togetherness. And when I decided not to be part of it, that decision had meaning. It only had meaning because the event had meaning. It had a certain element to it that said you should participate, right? You have an obligation, an expectation to participate. And you actually might even have a role. You might be the person that toasts the buns or flips the hamburgers or something, right? And by the way, you may not have been the person that flipped the hamburgers before, but now you're old enough you can flip the hamburgers. So you get a new role in the ritual. That alone says something different. Right? It is a way of reshaping your identities as you grow older. So as your roles in the rituals change, they have information about individual functioning and provide opportunities for reassessment and change in identities. So this is how we know that someone's different, is when they don't participate, or when the ritual has to change to accommodate them in some way. Okay, we're not going to take the vacation together this year. Why? Well, because so-and-so is different, and we can't coordinate it the same way. So we're going to find a different way of participating in the ritual, just not going to be the same as last year. So in some ways, rituals are routine, but rituals also have to have flexibility because families change. And that ability to change the ritual or any deviant behavior in participating in the ritual will have this adaptive function of telling the family, oh, something's wrong, something's different, or we need to change, or we need to correct, whatever that answer is. It gets shown up in the ritualized behaviors that happen on a regular basis. And this is why rituals become so important. They link us to the environment. They give us the sense that we are together, that we do work together, that we can have these things, and that there are people who are part of the unit, so it's coherent, and they tell us a lot about what's going on in family life. How do we measure family rituals? Let me continue this next time because we're out of time.
Oh, okay.
You were so engrossed.
I was just entranced.
Sorry. It's a good thing.
Don't be sorry.
It's pretty funny when you're only one person.
I know, it's...
You have no opportunity to sort of